everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I have a layout that I created for this month's Stretch the Sketch. In Stretch the Sketch, we take a sketch that's intended for a 12 by 12 inch layout and we either stretch it into a larger format or we shrink it into a smaller format. As soon as I saw this month's sketch, I thought this is a perfect sketch to stretch into a 2-page layout. For this layout, I'm using some paper pads. I love the paper pads that I buy, but then because I don't have matching embellishments, I will sometimes neglect to use them. So I decided that for this layout, I was going to dig into some of those beautiful paper pads that I've bought over the years. The one that I used for the wood grain background paper, that's called the Die Cuts with a View Copper Luxury Stack. And then for all the other papers that are on the layout, I am using a Die Cuts with a View Vintage Collector Stack. I started by cutting the pink pattern paper in half so that it was 6 inches from top to bottom. And then I was thinking I wanted a little bit smaller, so I cut both of those large strips down to 5.5 inches. And then I backed that with some turquoise pattern paper, and that's about 1/4 inch border around the outside. I attached those together and then I attached them down to the layout. I'm using a couple of photos here that are from quite a while ago. These are of my younger daughter doing some gymnastics in the backyard, and I have already scrapbooked some photos from this day, and I'm really trying hard to work on this album. It's from quite a few years ago, but it's taking me a while to get through, but that's okay. I'm not in any rush. I just thought that these would be good photos to use with this sketch. So I have one photo, as you could see, on the left and 2 photos on the right. I mounted them on some white cardstock, and then because the paper pad didn't have a yellow pattern paper that could read as a solid, I decided to pull another pattern paper into this layout. This is a really old Bow Bunny paper, and I thought that the color matched really well with this collection. One of the things that I really loved about this sketch, which by the way is a page map sketch, was that it had hexagons on it. I love putting hexagons on my scrapbooking layouts. And the reason that I chose this particular paper pad was that there were sheets of pattern paper that were filled with hexagons. So I fussy cut out a number of the hexagons, not all of them, but the majority of the page, and I'm now using them to spread across the layout. Now, since I'm stretching this sketch, I can't use the exact same configuration that the hexagons are placed in the sketch, but I did use the same basic idea, and because it's a 2-page layout, I'm going to spread them all the way from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner. It was odd in this layout because usually it takes me forever to decide exactly where I want to put things, especially a really large area like this. I would have suspected that I would have been fussing around with these hexagons for a really long time. But surprisingly, with only a few adjustments, I left the hexagons the way that they were. I did notice that the hexagons were a little too heavy in the lower right-hand corner, so I thinned those out a bit. But other than that, and like I said, 1 or 2 small movements, I kind of left the hexagons the way I decided to put them originally. I'm not sure if you could tell from the video, but the pattern paper that I fussy cut the hexagons from, that paper had lamination on it. I don't know if you're familiar. Some scrapbook papers, I find especially in pads, they tend to have kind of a light laminate coating on them that makes it have a sheen. And I really like that. And I especially liked it in this case because I have the paper that's just regular and not shiny in the background. And then these hexagons are a little bit shiny. Well, because it's a 2-page spread, I had to spread that one hexagon across the 2 pages. So I cut it and then I glued it down. And I was going to start in the lower right-hand corner, attaching the hexagons down, but I thought it would be better to start in the middle. That way, if I got a little off track with placing them, it wouldn't be too far from where I started on either end to go back and adjust things a little bit. There were quite a few images on these hexagons that really didn't necessarily apply to the theme of this page. There were things like guitars, typewriters, cupcakes, cameras, hot air balloons, And normally I'm a little fussy about those things. I really like the things on the layout to have to do with the subject. But for this particular layout, it didn't bother me that a lot of these images didn't necessarily go with gymnastics. I think I was okay with it because all of these images had to do with youth and with fun. And my daughter wasn't in a gymnastics competition. She was in the backyard having fun and enjoying herself. So I think it kind of worked. I created two additional clusters of the hexagons. I have one in the lower left-hand corner. That one is kind of mirroring the sketch. And then I put two more hexagons on the upper right-hand corner, and that was to balance out the lower left-hand corner. I also have some sentiments on the layout. One says, "Be you," and one says, "I love you," and the other one said, "Live life happy." But I decided to take those off. I thought that they were taking away from the hexagons, and the flow of hexagons across the page wasn't as clear with those sentiments where I had them. I wanted to call this page Flippin' Fun. There were some letters, really large letters, that were also part of the pattern paper. So I was thinking that I would spell out fun with those letters, and then I would use some letters in my stash to write Flippin'. I cut out the F, the U, and the N, and then to help them stand out a little bit, I used some wood grain paper that was also in the pad to back them, and I think that really helps them to stand out. I attached the letters down, starting with the U, because that was in the center, and then I wanted to make sure that the other two letters were evenly spaced. I think it's always a little tricky when you're spreading a title across two pages, but luckily it was only 3 letters that I had to space correctly. And this pad was actually a great pad to use without any embellishments because it did have so many things to cut out. It had letters, it had the hexagons, it had the sentiments. So I didn't really feel with this particular layout that I was short on embellishments, but I do often stay away from the pads for that reason, and I have to try a little bit harder to use up some of those pads. I was looking through my pads and I really have some nice pads. There have been some nice pads available over the years, so I have to try to incorporate more of the pads into my layouts. I wanted to add a little bit more yellow, so I used that piece of yellow paper that I had in my stash, and I used a Fiskars scallop punch, and I added a yellow border on the top and on the bottom of the large area of pink. And then I used one of the pattern papers and I cut out these arrows. I got this idea from the sketch. On the sketch, there was a little bit more layering of embellishments than I have on my layout, but I thought that this would be an easy way to add a little bit of detail to the layout without competing with the hexagons, which are, of course, the main embellishment on the page. Now I'm adding some photo corners to my layout, something I love to do. I use my EK Success scalloped photo corner punch and some of the pattern paper in the pad, and I added blue photo corners to the 2 photos that are on opposite ends of the layout, and then pink to the other photo. And I love photo corners. I think they just add a nice finishing touch, and they add a little bit of color, or extra color, I should say, to the layout. And I like to use my ATG adhesive to attach the photo corners down to the photos so I don't get any liquid adhesive on my photos, because if anybody will get liquid adhesive on their photos, it would be me. I always seem to mess up my photos if it's possible, so I try to be really careful with getting glue on them. Now I'm adding the word flippin' on top of fun. I tried using some jelly bean soup letters, but they were a little bit too tall for the space I wanted to put them in, so I decided to go with these very small pink Paislee letters. They're from a collection called Again and Again. And then I noticed on these letter stickers that there were little stars, so I put a star on each of those arrows that I had made, and then I put 2 stars on the large letter that is an N, and one of them fell off. I don't know where it went. I actually added some glue to them, so I don't know how that one fell off, but I am still on the lookout and hoping that I will find it somewhere. That happens often. It's really, really tiny, so I'm not 100% sure, but hopefully I'll find it. I wanted to add a few more stars to the layout, so I used 2 different punches. One is a Fiskars punch and one is a Family Treasures punch. They're just 2 slightly different sizes. To create the slightly larger stars, I used the same wood grain brown paper that I used to back the large letters of the title. And then the smaller stars were punched out of the yellow, blue, and pink pattern paper scraps that I had left over from other things that I cut out on the layout. And then I spread those around the layout. I mainly put them on the hexagons, but I did put one pink star next to the title. I really like to add embellishments to the title that I'm using on the rest of the page. I think it helps to just bring everything together. I say that a lot, but it's definitely something that I have found works for me. I didn't used to do that, and I find that since I'm doing it, I feel the layouts that I'm making look a little bit more cohesive. I had glued one of the stars on crooked, so I created a new one, and then I had all my stars punched out, and then I went around and glued each of the stars where I had them on the layout. For me, this was very decisive and very brave because I usually like to use ATG so I can move things around if I have to, but I decided that I was happy with the stars. I made a last minute quick switch, and now I'm happy with where I have the stars, and I didn't actually move them in any way after I was done with this. Very unusual for me. The whole time I was working with these hexagons, I was thinking that they would look really nice if they had some stitching on them, and I finally decided that I had to put the stitching. It would really make a difference in the layout. So I'm using this little Amy Tangerine paper piercer that I bought years ago, I think in TJ Maxx. I punched a hole in each of the, I guess you would call them corners of the hexagons, and then I punched a hole in the center and then a hole on either side of the center, and that helped me to space those holes out a little bit. And you can see here that the stitching is all done. It didn't take that long, but never underestimate how long stitching takes. It's definitely not quick. And now I'm going back in with two of those sentiments. I have the I love you under the photo this time, and to keep the BU sentiment from interfering with the look and the flow of the hexagons, I placed it a little bit higher on that pink strip so that it would still embellish the page, but it wouldn't interfere with the hexagons. Now I'm adding some enamel dots. I add enamel dots to the photo corners, and then I also add some to the centers of the stars. When I was all done with the layout, I realized I hadn't added all of the enamel dots that I wanted to add on the photo corners. I don't know how I missed that, but I did go back, and you'll see in the final photos that I have those enamel dots on all of the photo corners on the layout. I use the smallest enamel dots on the stars and then some medium enamel dots on the photo corners. And that is the very last touch that I add to the layout, and here are some close-ups. Thank you very much for watching Stretch the Sketch, everybody. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I really find Stretch the Sketch to be quite a challenge. We always call these challenges, but I do find it challenging, and I have to think a lot in order to decide what I'm going to do for this sketch. So I always love Stretch the Sketch. Please look in the description box. You'll find links to everybody else who has created a video for this month's Stretch the Sketch. I will be back with another layout soon, and I hope to see you then. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.